Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago, one of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose, as long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. This is your host, Sean. On this episode, we have the Bulls brass pulling a midnight press conference and nobody's there to hear it. We've got the dismantling of the Chicago Bulls, Blackhawks in trouble in the playoffs, and two good teams in Chicago baseball at the same time. All of this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. But first, as always, we'd like to mention our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at a family-friendly, affordable price. Tickets starting at just $7. And the Ice Hogs are now in the Calder Cup playoffs. Calder Cup is like the Stanley Cup for the AHL. And they are in the first round matchup after ending the season on a 3-game winning streak. It is a best-of-5 series against the Lake Erie Monsters. First 2 games will be in Rockford at the lovely BMO Harris Bank Center on April 20th and April 21st. Both games at 7 p.m. puck drop. So get tickets now at icehogs.com. Where to begin? Where to begin? We say this every single week. Where to begin? I'm going to start with our Blackhawks. Blackhawks are in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs against St. Louis Blues. I think we all are aware of this. This series has been, I guess, probably, if you're a non-objective fan, I'm sorry, you aren't if you're a fan that is not a homer and you can actually sit back and look at things from a perspective of actually looking at the stats, looking at the teams, looking at what this matchup is, and what the history of this matchup has been this season, I don't think anybody would be surprised by what we're seeing right now. The series, 3 games so far, and every single game has been scored by won by 1 goal. First one was 1-0 in overtime after a deflection off of a Trevor Van Riemsdyk skate. The second one was won by the Blackhawks after an overturned goal by Tarasenko for the Blues. The Blackhawks won by 1 goal, and thought they were going to win by 2 goals, but a last-second goal by the Blues made that a 3-2 game. And then this last game, the Blackhawks, they got a little taste of their own medicine, and the Blues scored late to rally and win this one. The Blues have regained home ice advantage and now lead the series 2-1 with it. Game 4 in Chicago tomorrow. So that's where we're at. I want to talk a little bit more about this. If you really are looking at stats and looking at what's happened, this is really what you did expect. Really close, competitive games, low scoring. Both goalies are playing out of their minds. I really thought that was going to be the difference in what the Blackhawks would be able to do to win, would be that Crawford would be playing better than the Blues goalie Elliott. And I don't know if that's happening. They are both playing absolutely lights out, stand on your head goaltending. It's absolutely phenomenal to watch if you love good goaltending. Both goalies are just absolutely robbing players of goals. And the Blackhawks are just having so much trouble trying to figure it out. They're putting good shots on. They're peppering the goal. They're getting people in front of the net, and it's just not getting rebound chances. They're just not there. It's been absolutely tough to score. And that's sort of what you were going to expect with this series. And I think a lot of Blackhawks fans thought just the fact that the Blackhawks were going to walk in there, intimidate the Blues to win this series. And I didn't think that was going to happen. I really thought this was going to be a tight matchup, and that's what it's been so far. I mean, even Ken Hitchcock, the coach of the Blues, is surprised at where this has been, because I don't think he thought his team had it in him to pull this off versus the Blackhawks so far. But it's far from over. You have to look at it from a few things. Is if you go back to 2009, when the Blackhawks first started being a force to be reckoned with in the Stanley Cup playoffs, the year before they won that first of the 3 cups with this Taves era, they're 6-15 in the first 3 games of a series, games 1, 2, and 3, which last night concluded game 3. So they're 6-15 in those first 3 games of a series. But then games 3 through 7, they're 44-15. 44-15. That is a much different ball game. I mean, and the theory is, people are saying that the Blackhawks thrive under pressure, and part of me wants to buy into that because we've seen it so many times. But at some point, is there anything in the well to draw upon? Everyone thought Duncan Keith coming back, and after they won game 2 in awesome fashion, that this was going to be the deciding factor, and the Blackhawks were going to go on to win the series and roll on. But Duncan Keith had a terrible game 3. He didn't look good. Hossa hasn't had a single point in the first 3 games of the series, and that top line has got to start coming together. You're already struggling on that second line. Sure, Panarin looks good, and he's got some points, and Kane has a couple of assists, but the Blues are doing a great job of taking away time and space from that second line, and that's where they thrive, is time and space. In the playoffs, the ice gets much smaller as you go into the playoffs. That's the old theory. That's as long as I've been watching hockey, they always say that the ice gets smaller when the playoffs start, and it's so true. You watch a lot of these big time skaters, finesse guys, they have a much harder time scoring. And guys like Kane and Panarin, smaller guys, faster guys, the space is getting taken away. They're having a harder time. They're going to have to work much harder to be able to get goals. And this is the time when the Taves line has to start stepping up. And Taves and Ladd have looked good, but it's Hossa. Hossa's been, for the lack of a better term, okay. But we're going to have to see the third line and the fourth line step up. And that's been the formula for the Blackhawks winning for the last several years, is rolling 4 lines out there and playing good defense. They're rolling out there a line and a half with mediocre at best defense. Sure, the Blues aren't scoring a lot of goals, but it's a big part of that has been Corey Crawford. And the bigger question is, who's played better so far in these 3 games of the series? It's almost a toss-up. You look, and this period it's the Hawks, this period it's the Blues. Overall, you could argue that the team that played better in every game is the one that lost. I thought the Blackhawks were the much better team in game 1, except for maybe that first period, but they ended up losing, and I thought the Hawks got dominated a lot in game 2, and they ended up winning. And then I thought they looked fantastic for the most part in game 3 until from the middle of the third period on. You had, and I'm getting feedback from Blackhawks fans that are saying, well, Kane cost them that game. Sure, it was a dumb penalty. It was a lazy penalty. But those things happen at the end of games. It's just lack of discipline. those things happen. But if you're the Blackhawks, you've got to kill those penalties off. You just have to. You can't give up late goals and expect to win. Kane put his team in a predicament, but in reality, where would this team be without him? What else? Like I said, there's no space for that second line. The top line is going to have to step up. This is a much different Blues team than we've seen before that sort of wilt at the will of the Blackhawks. This team just doesn't care. They're a lot like that. Was it 2 seasons ago when the Blackhawks lost in the conference finals to the LA Kings, when the LA Kings went on to beat the Rangers in the Stanley Cup finals? That Kings team, every time the Blackhawks would knock them down, the Kings would get right back up and knock the Blackhawks down, and it just went back and forth like a slugfest. And both teams were so good, and it was so much fun to watch, and it was so stressful to watch because as a fan, you're just sitting there and your hands are sweating, you're just waiting for the next thing to happen. They were so evenly matched, and we're getting that with the first round this year. Is the Blues and the Blackhawks are just really evenly matched up, and you can't discount them. This Blues team they had such a good record this year. They beat the Blackhawks fair and square for the season, and they beat them. They had a better record than during the season. Earned that home ice advantage. You've had 2 games decided by redirected pucks. One, Blues redirected off of TVR for that overtime goal to win the game in Game 1. And then the last game, one redirected off of Roosevelt into the goal, which ended up being the game winner. You look at your defensemen, and you've got your big 3 of Seabrook, Keith, and Hjalmarsson. But what do you have after that? If you're the Blackhawks, I think as fans, we're so frustrated with Michael Roosevelt because he's plotting out there, and he's just not good enough to be out there anymore, I don't think. But what other options does Quenneville have? Quenneville's big thing is he doesn't want to see his defensemen make mistakes. He can live with them not being talented enough. He can't live with them making mistakes. And if you notice, the Blackhawks recalled David Rundblad from Rockford before the playoffs started. There's a good chance we could see David Rundblad in here before we see Christian Ehrhoff or Gustafsson again. I thought Gustafsson had a nice regular season, especially considering he was a rookie, but he's so willing to jump into the offensive plays that you find that he kind of puts his partner in a pickle a little bit, leaves him hanging on situations. And Joe Quenneville won't have that in the playoffs. He's just going to take away minutes. So you're going to see, you're going to see Svedberg in there getting those minutes rather than Gustafsson, even though I think Gustafsson had a better season. And TVR, I think, has been okay. But if you're Joel Quenneville, I don't think it's so much which defenseman you're putting out there as much as it is what pairings are you going to put out there. You've got to put these guys in a comfortable position that they're ready to play, and they're ready to finding a comfort level for these guys, because it's just, on some of these plays, the Blackhawks defensemen are getting exposed a little bit more than I've ever seen that happen in the last 6-7 years. It's been a little rough. So if you're the Blackhawks, there's a lot of things there's a lot of question marks you have. And going into this playoffs, there was a ton of questions you had, from goaltending. What's Crawford going to look like, having been out so much and having a rough game, that one game he played before the playoffs? Could anybody else score? Blah, blah, blah. There was so many questions that you had to answer. And going into the playoffs so far, I think you've answered some of them. Corey Crawford is going to be fine. He's great, as he has been the last couple of years. But finding offense and having those third and fourth lines show up. And I think part of it is Quenneville's going to have to play those third and fourth lines more minutes to get them more in the groove of the game. If you look at the ice times, They're not getting as many shifts as I would expect. And quickly looking at ice time, I think Trevor Van Riemsdyk got like 25 minutes in that last game, which is a ton for a guy that that doesn't seem like he would be a huge Q guy, but he's getting big time minutes. So it's he's clearly not in the doghouse with Q. Because Q and his defenseman, if you're in the doghouse, you're in the doghouse, and you're not getting out. Just ask Christian Ehrhoff and Gustafsson. So what to look for in the rest of the series? Honestly, I think it's going to be more of the same. The big difference is going to be which neither team's big scorers, big time names have come up big so far. Look for Tarasenko. Look for some of the other guys from the Blues to come up big. Can they do it? Or the Blackhawks, can Taves or Ladd or Hossa come up big? Can that top line come up big? Will the fourth line come out and play? I think it's going to be the stars that are going to be the ones that make a difference, and which team's stars are going to decide to come out and play. That's going to be the team that wins. And right now, it's a toss-up. I still think you're going to have very close games going all the way through, and I really do think this is going to go 7 in this series. I'm going to stick with my prediction of what I said before the playoffs started, that the Blackhawks are going to win this. I thought they were going to win in 6, but I think it's going to go to 7. Blackhawks win this series in 7, and Taves finally comes up big. He's going to have 2 goals in the next game. Boom. Prediction. Let's talk Bulls a little bit, as I don't think we talked about them last time. The season ended, and immediately after, it was a late game. I'm trying to remember what else was going on that day. I think there was a Blackhawks playoff game going on. I think it was the first game of the playoffs. The Cubs were playing. The White Sox were playing. All of them were on. And I'm just going to take a wild guess, but the 1985 Bears 30 for 30 was on as well, the rerun. But everything was going on, and if you're a Chicago sports fan, you probably were not tuned into the Bulls game because they were terrible and they were playing one of the worst teams in the history of basketball, in the Philadelphia 76ers, for the last game of the season because it didn't mean anything. You were probably watching either the Cubs, the White Sox, or the Blackhawks in the playoffs. Or you just weren't watching any sports at all. But tell me, am I wrong? Did any of you watch that Bulls game? Okay, but on to the point is immediately after that game, without any sort of announcement, late at night at a weird channel, because the Cubs and the White Sox and the Blackhawks had all of the normal channels, all the WGNs, the Comcast Sports Nets, blah, blah, blah. The Bulls game was on a weirdo channel that I don't even know if I get. Didn't even check, to be honest with you. After the game, Gar Forman and John Paxson come out to have an impromptu end of the season discussion about what happened and what was going to happen going forward. And there's already some media rumblings that Gar Forman was going to get the axe, and possibly Hoiberg. And the two of them come out in hiding when no one is there to listen, and barely any of the media were, none of the media knew this was going to happen, but not everybody was there to even cover it because it was just impromptu at last minute after a late game. And those two come out and basically say, we're going to stay the course. Gar Forman's not going anywhere. John Paxson's not going anywhere. Fred Hoiberg is not going anywhere. And these two had the nerve to say, we're being held accountable for what happens. I don't think they know what being held accountable means. I really don't. Being held accountable means when you're terrible, there's a consequence. It's not, well, if Gar Forman is bad, John Paxson goes, shame on you, Gar. And when John Paxson's terrible, Gar Forman goes, shame on you, John. Like, that's not a consequence. The consequence is this team was supposed to compete for a championship, and they stunk. They stunk. And granted, there were injuries on this team. There was a lot of injuries. But you know what? Those injuries don't account for you being this bad in a really bad conference. That would be, if you had this many injuries, that would account for you not being the second seed behind the Cleveland Cavaliers. That would account for you being like the fifth seed or the fourth seed. Those injuries, that's what those account for. But no, the Bulls did not make the playoffs. And none of those people were held accountable. They all kept their jobs. Nothing is changing. And you can say all day long that you're held accountable, but it's just not true. There was clearly no repercussion for what happened this season. Not a single person had a repercussion. And they didn't even have a plan for going forward. They didn't address any of the issues. This team is a disaster. You have a superstar in Jimmy Butler who had a terrible season after he got all this money. His three-point shooting percentage dropped like 7%. His defense went down. He ended up getting injured at the end of the season, which you can't really blame him for being injured, but he didn't play that well before the injury, and he was throwing his coach under the bus. He was throwing other players under the bus. He can't get along with the former MVP and Derrick Rose, and he's not a leader. Just because you walk in there and say, I'm the best player, I make the most money, I'm the leader, doesn't mean you're a leader. It's not how that works. You have to be a leader. And then you have the Bulls talking about how they're going to build around Jimmy Butler and Fred Hoiberg's offense. Jimmy Butler's already said he doesn't want to play in Fred Hoiberg's offense. So you're going to build around a coach and a star player who can't coexist. And what pieces are you going to put around him? It doesn't make any sense. And then you have Derrick Rose, who towards the second half of the season started to figure it out a little bit and play more like the Derrick of old as far as his ability to get to the net and scoring. But there's one big difference between what you saw this year and the years prior to the knee injury. Is those years he was somebody you had to account for if you were the other team. And other teams game plan for him. He would draw double teams, triple teams when he would drive the lane. Basically, everyone would collapse on Derrick Rose. He was able to kick the ball out for somebody else to score. You're not seeing those performances as far as assists from Derrick Rose. Derrick might be able to get to the basket like he did on occasion, and he might be able to put up a shot like old Derrick, but he's not producing the same amount of offense as old Derrick. And no point in this season have you seen Jimmy Butler take the team on his shoulders and do something great on the same night as you saw Derrick Rose do something great. It's like one goes, oh, it's my turn to this night. Oh, it's my turn this night. And Paul Gasol's like, well, I'm just going to put in some empty points and during the empty minutes. Paul Gasol is going to opt out of his contract and skedaddle. And the Bulls would be absolutely stupid to re-sign him. Stupid. He's like the antithesis of what Fred Hoiberg is trying to do with this offense. He's slow. He's plotting. He doesn't want to run up and down the court. He doesn't want to create offense. And he wants to play a slow, plotting, half-court style game. Don't pay him max contract money because it's stupid. You've got a plethora of big men who don't fit into your system, from Mirotic to Taj Gibson to Joakim Noah to Paul Gasol. You gotta part with these guys. This season has been an absolute disaster. And Gar Forman and John Paxson, the one honest thing that they said during their apology but not apologize fest was Fred Hoiberg wasn't ready to be a coach of this team. And that they were trying to indict Fred Hoiberg, but indirectly all it did was it said they made a stupid decision. They thought they had one more go around in this Bulls team. And if that was true, if that was truly true, that they had one more go around with this Bulls lineup, why would you change your head coach to somebody so drastically different in styles with one last go around? I think we've all seen, even when you put superstars together, when you put the Miami Heat dream team, the big three together, they took them that first year. Sure, they were talented enough to go to the finals, but they couldn't win until they felt each other out. And it even took the first part of that season to get it together. This team is not nearly that good, and they don't have a LeBron James, and they don't have a Dwayne Wade, and they don't have a Chris Bosh. They thought they were going to somehow figure out a new system and gel with this old team enough to win a championship. Something just doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up. Somewhere along the way, there's multiple lies on top of lies being told by John Paxson and Gar Forman. So what do you do with this team? Like, where do you go from here? I don't even know. I've said it before. I've said it. I'll say it again. I really feel that the NBA is the hardest league to build a championship for. You just need a bunch of superstars. You basically need a couple of top 10 picks. You have to tank for a couple of seasons, get some draft picks in there, and then spend some money on a free agent to complement your young draft picks, and then you get to win the games. And you pray that your top draft pick winds up being somebody like a LeBron James or a Kobe Bryant rather than a Greg Oden. So the team that's poised to be the next Golden State Warriors is going to be probably the Minnesota Timberwolves with Jabari Parker and the other kid that they drafted number 1 the other year. Was it 2 years ago? And then they're probably going to sign Van Gundy or Thibodeau to be their head coach. They've got money to sign a free agent, and they're going to have another top pick. They're going to put that all together, and suddenly they're going to have a team that's forced to be reckoned with. The Bulls, they're losing, but they're not losing nearly enough to get a top pick. So they're probably going to have like a number 14 pick. It's not good enough to get a game changer. And they don't have any pieces enough to move up any further. And so the Bulls either just need to tank, or they need to really steal this draft and find somebody at the number 14 pick that's going to blossom into a Steph Curry. And that's really unlikely to happen. And then the next question is to trade Jimmy or to not trade Jimmy. You got to ask yourself, who do you build a team around? You build a team around a top 10 guy. That's pretty much the standard. You build a team around a top 10 type player. You build a team around a Steph Curry. You build a team around LeBron James. You build a team around a James Harden. You build a team around these top-notch players. But the Bulls don't. Is Jimmy Butler a top 10 player in this league? And if you do decide to build around Jimmy Butler, is Fred Hoiberg the coach that you want? I mean, he already got just pantsed by Jimmy Butler in the media already once this year. Can you come back from that? I don't know. I mean, if you guys have thoughts on what the Bulls do, please send them my way, as I'm clueless. And I'm going to try to have some Bulls guests on next week and talk a little bit more about what the hell they do going forward. I thought there would be some drastic changes with Gar Forman at least gone, maybe even John Paxson, and possibly even Fred Hoiberg and Jimmy Butler gone. I thought they would just clean house and trade and get as many draft picks as possible, stink next year, get a top lottery pick, and then try to rebuild from there with all this money that they have. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So if you guys have thoughts on the Bulls, shout them out. I want to move on to the Cubbies. The season was rolling along really nice. They aced against Anaheim and Cincinnati, and they were just playing extremely well. And then came the Colorado Rockies, came to Chicago, and just stymied the juggernaut offense of the Cubs in Game 1. Jake Arrieta had to pitch an absolute gem of a game for Game 2 for them to get a win. And then John Lester comes and pitches an absolutely ace of a game, Game 3, and the Cubs offense again is stymied, and they lose that, and suddenly they lose the first series that they've lost this season, and you start hearing rumblings about the sky is falling from the fandom. Brace yourselves a little bit. This is a 162 game season. After tonight's win against St. Louis, they're 13 games in. They're not even 10% done with the season. This is a really, really long season. Give them a little bit of time. It's still cold in April. Those bats are warming up. Give them a break a little bit. If you look, sure, the Cubs' batting averages haven't been very good, but you know what they've been able to do is they work the count. They make those starting pitchers throw lots of pitches. Those pitchers then can't go as deep in there, and they make them go to the bullpen. And I mean, the fact is the more pitchers you see, the more likely you're going to get somebody that's not going to be on fire. It's hard to get 3-4 pitchers in a row that are all on their game that day, and somebody's going to get figured out. And eventually is the Cubs. Not only that, they're working the count, making those pitchers throw strikes, or they're capitalizing with walks. They're getting on base. So if you look at the Cubs, sure, their batting averages are terrible. Let's see. Addison Russell's batting .237. Jorge Soler is batting .235. Chris Bryant's batting .229. Ben Zobrist is batting .214. Jason Hayward is batting .205. And Anthony Rizzo is batting .186. That's terrible. The Cubs are 10-3 with their top guys batting under .250. How does that happen? Then I'm just going to tell you is look at their on-base percentage. On-base percentage is Addison Russell, 356. He added 120 points from his batting average onto that on-base percentage. Soler is a 333, another 100 points. Chris Bryant's at 315. Zobrist is 333. He's getting on base 1 out of 3 times. It's just ridiculous. Hayward's at 314, and Rizzo's at 352. The guy's batting 186, and he's got a 352 on-base percentage. And you add into that is Dexter Fowler is just killing the ball. Dexter Fowler has 2 home runs. How many RBIs? 9 RBIs. Is batting 375 with a 510 on-base percentage. That's what happens with this team is guys are getting on base and they have timely hitting. Put together a couple runs here, a couple runs there. And that's what's happening is hitting's contagious. Hitting is contagious. Sure, they're not going up there and stymieing these pitchers and just whacking them around, but they're going through the lineup 1-2 times, figuring it out, getting on base a few times, and then once they figure it out, it's like one inning gets them 3-4 runs, and suddenly it's a whole different ball game. It's just if you think that the sky is falling, it's a little bit silly. I mean, the Rockies went in there with the strategy is their pitchers aren't throwing balls. They're just not walking people. And they're just throwing strike after strike after strike, and they're forcing the opponent's batters to hit. And, I mean, they've got shelled a couple of games. I think the Giants shelled them. But the Cubs, their bats have just been cold. They're not drawing walks because their pitchers, the Colorado Rocky pitchers, are throwing strikes. So they come in here forcing the Cubs to capitalize on swinging the bat. And that's where they went into trouble, is that first game and the third game of the series, their bats are cold. They're not getting those hits. So you have John Lester, who, came through and mowed down the opponent lineup for the most part, and they lose 2-0 in that game. It sucks, but that's the nature of the beast. Eventually these bats are going to warm up. You're not going to hold Anthony Rizzo to a 186 batting average this whole season. You're not going to hold Hayward to a 205. These guys are going to hit close to 300. Ben Zobrist probably going to hit around 300. His batting average is going to go up another 100 points. Eventually, these guys are going to start getting hits, and that's when you're going to have a force to be reckoned with. And they're already a force to be reckoned with. They're 10-3 already, but mostly it's been on the back of solid fielding. Other than that first loss to the Rockies, for the most part, this Cubs team has been phenomenal in the field, and the pitching has just been ridiculous. I'm looking at the stats right now, and they only have four pitchers with a whip over a 1. And that's Trevor Cahill, who tonight came in there and looked great in pitching the 9th against the Cardinals. He's got a 1.5, but overall he's got a 2.7 ERA. That's pretty darn good. John Lackey's got a 1.42 whip, and he got shell shocked in his first outing, but got the win. And what's his record? So he's pitched 3 games, and he's 3-0. And he was pitched. So you looked at his first start. He was rough those first innings, and then the last 2 innings or 3 innings, he really solidified up. In the second outing, he got a little bit better. And this last outing, he just absolutely stymied the Cardinals' offense and looked great with 11 strikeouts. So I'm not worried about that. The guy is he's 3-0. He can have that whip right now. He's just getting better and better. Clayton Richards got a 2.25, and he's had a rough start so far. We'll take that back. But then you've got Jason Hamill, who's got a 1.25 whip, which is not terrible. It's not good, but it's not terrible. But he's also got a 0.75 ERA and has pitched fantastic. So I don't know what else to say. This Cubs starting rotation has been great so far. They already lead the league in least number of walks out of any starting staff. Jason Hamill has got a 0.75 ERA. Arrieta is 3-0 with a 1.23 ERA and a 0.77 whip. He is just picked right back up where he left off. Been almost unhittable. Sure, he gave up a couple. Other than those home runs to Paul Goldschmidt, who's a legitimate MVP candidate, if you take those away, Arrieta has just been unhittable. John Lester has been very good as well. He's 1-1 record right now, but he's got a 2.21 ERA and a 0.84 whip. I would take that any day of the week. Hendricks had a bad last outing, but he's 1-1 with a 0.95 whip and a 2.84 ERA. So your number 5 pitcher has a less than a 1 whip and a 2.84 ERA. We'll take that any day of the week. And even the relievers have been all right, other than Clayton Richard. So you've got this pitching staff that just already on a roll. They're going to keep you in a lot of games even when these bats are cold. And once everything starts heating up, this team is going to be really tough to beat. What else? Let's quickly move on then to the White Sox. Oh, one more thing about the Cubs. It was really nice to see them beat the Cardinals with John Lackey on the mound in St. Louis. to go in there and just shut them out 5-0. It's great to see. I thought that would be a big test for the Cubs, is what was going to happen in this rivalry, because it's always been like the big brother, little brother type thing. Even when the Cubs have a good staff like last year, they're a good team. It was tough for them to win, and even in the playoffs, John Lackey threw a great game. That game won against them. It's sometimes mind over matter type thing. It was like when the Bulls had to overcome the Detroit Pistons in the Michael Jordan era. It took them several tries to be able to do it, and to get that, they knew that they were talented enough to beat the Detroit Pistons, but in order to beat the king, you got to beat the king, and it's sometimes about that attitude to dethrone them, and you need to be able to go in there with that chutzpah and moxie in order to win. And I was worried that the Cubs wouldn't have that and would have a trouble time beating the Cardinals this year and some of those other upper echelon teams over the last several years. But it was nice, the first meeting of the season, to go in there and pad your lead in the division by going out there and whipping on the Cardinals. Hopefully we can have a couple more games like that against the Cardinals, but it's nice to see them have the moxie to go in there and just the confidence to go in there in St. Louis and beat the Cardinals. And if you look, the Cubs at 10-3 are the best team in baseball. Best team in baseball record-wise, 10-3. The next best is Washington at 9-3, who look fantastic. They were my preseason prediction last year to win the World Series, and I think they've gotten better by bringing in a legitimate coach. So let's see from there. And I guess, one more thing is Carl Ravitch, who is a baseball analyst for ESPN, tweeted over the weekend that he felt that the National League East and the National League Central races were already wrapped up. They're already wrapped up on April 17th. The Nationals are 3 games up on the Mets. The Mets, who went to the World Series last year, have one of the best young pitching staffs in baseball. They're 3 up on them, and that race is over. And the Cubs are 3 up on Pittsburgh, who made the playoffs last year and haven't played them yet. I don't know. I think they're just silly. I think that's really silly, and it's not professional, analysis of this. This is a really long season. There's, like 150 games left to catch up 3. I mean, maybe the Nationals and the Cubs do win those divisions. I mean, if you run statistical analysis and ab initio calculations and Monte Carlo predictions, etc., all these mathematical things that people smarter than me run, is probably those are the best odds of winning those divisions. But it is a long way to go. And as we saw with the Cubs is, Kyle Schwarber got hurt, done for the season, and it's not going to cost them, basically a rookie is not going to be the cause that they don't win a World Series or go to a World Series, but it's not helping the case either. It's making it harder, and it reminds you why they brought Dexter Fowler back in the first place. But it's a long, long season. And then, as a reminder, we have 2 teams in the city. And not only do we have 2 teams in the city, both teams are good. These teams are really good. The White Sox had a really hot start. A little bit of a rough night tonight. The 7-0 loss to the Angels, but they are only a half game out of first place behind Kansas City. The pitching has been phenomenal for the White Sox, other than a certain John Danks, who I think we all know is terrible. And it's funny is when you start talking about people at 1 year, oh, maybe it was just a fluke. They had a good year, a fluke, bad year, whatever the case may be. John Danks being bad last year was not a fluke, because he's going to be bad again this year. And if he plays next year, he'll be bad again next year. John Danks is not a Major League Baseball caliber starting pitcher. Right now he's hovering around an 8 ERA with a 1.59 WHIP. He's 0-2 in 2 starts in 11 innings pitched. So he's not eating up innings. He's averaging 5.5 innings per game, which is eating at the bullpen. If you can't get 6 or 7 innings as a starter, your bullpen is getting taxed as you have to get pulled out of the game. So he's not eating up innings, and he's not getting guys out. He's giving up a lot of base runners, and he's just giving up a lot of runs in general. But Matt Latos has been great. 2 starts so far, 0.75 ERA and a 0.5 WHIP. And he's not throwing, missiles out there. He's just throwing strikes. He's throwing the ball over the plate, got good command, and he's throwing strikes. You're seeing a little bit of like 2013 Matt Latos, 2012, 2013 Matt Latos, which is great for the White Sox because that was a smart pickup. Matt Latos, and I know we had a listener who asked a question about him a couple weeks ago that we did answer, but who is Matt Latos and what can we expect from him? I said, best case scenario is this is what you get. And you're hitting best case scenarios so far early in the season. And granted, it is really early in the season, but after 2 games, you've got rock solid starter. My only complaint is he's only going 6 innings a game. But if you're with your number 5 or your number 4 starter, you're getting 6 innings with a 0.75 ERA and a 0.5 WHIP. You can live with that, having to tax your bullpen a little more. Chris Sale's his usual greatness. He's 3-0 so far with a 2.35 ERA and a 0.78 WHIP. Not hitting him. Quintana's been pretty solid. Rodon had been pretty solid except for tonight. Got rocked a little bit. But this team is got a really solid starting pitching rotation other than John Danks. And that's going to keep them in so many ball games. It's already a very competitive open division. Think about it is, Minnesota started this season 0-9, and now they're 4-9. They're 4-9, and they're only 4.5 games out of first place after starting 0-9. So this is a really competitive division. The Twins are much better than they were to start the season. Cleveland is a really good pitching staff. The White Sox have a really good pitching staff. Detroit's got some nice pitchers and some great hitting. And Kansas City was in the last 2 World Series. But they've lost some key guys. So there's a lot of reasons that you could say any one of those teams could go on and win this division and make the playoffs. So the White Sox have just as good a chance as anybody, barring injuries to that starting lineup. But you need to start seeing more from your hitters, and you need to start seeing smarter base running and better fielding on this team. And you've already got some nice hitting from some of your new additions like Brett Laurie, almost 300 batter. Milky Cabrera, he's already starting the season well with over 300 batting average. Adam Eaton is actually hitting the ball. And it's the one guy that you expect to get hits from is Jose Abreu, who's only batting .217. He's a professional hitter. He's a very, very good hitter. You're not going to hold that guy down. He's going to end up hitting about 300. Just like with the Cubs, you're going to see some of these bats start to warm up. Todd Frazier's not going to hit 154 this season. You don't have Adam Dunn there. You're probably not going to get a lot of hitting production out of your catchers, Navarro and Avila. But Avi Garcia, I don't think you're going to get a 171 from him at the end of the year. Austin Jackson has been a blessing for the White Sox in playing center field because he's covering a lot of ground and playing good center field, which is making the area that left and right field have to cover that much better. And Jimmy Rollins is batting .231. I don't know if you're going to get too much more out of that guy. Maybe you get around a .250. Maybe, if you're lucky, .260 out of him. But what Jimmy Rollins is doing is he's bringing veteran leadership to this team. If you watch in games, he'll pull players aside and talk to them. Even in the field, he's giving out advice. Jimmy Rollins has been an MVP in this league. He's won a World Series. Jimmy Rollins is a really good player, and I've heard actual baseball media say that he's might be a Hall of Fame level player. I don't know if I say that, but Jimmy Rollins has been a great player in this league, and he's bringing that know-how and that winning experience to the White Sox, along with Todd Frazier, who brings that quiet sort of confidence and camaraderie to this team. And Brett Laurie's a fiery guy. You bring all those, and suddenly you've got some veteran guys in there who are going to be vocal and get this team going. And even though you lose your team leader in Little Drake LaRoche, you're suddenly you're playing well. And unlike the Cubs, who I think are just absolutely built to not go on a losing streak, just based on their ability to draw walks and their solid starting pitching. The White Sox are still a team in progress, and they're a team that has to learn to win. They're going to go through some ups and downs, but I really do think that in the end, they're going to have more ups and downs, and they're going to finish over 500 and either win this division or be in second place. I really feel that. What else? I guess that's about it for the White Sox. This is a good team. They're actually fun to watch. And it's especially great when you watch them at home games and you don't have to hear stupid Hawk Harrelson, who's the worst. And really quickly is, I never really watched a lot of Dodgers games. I mean, when they played the Cubs, and I've gone to see the Dodgers a couple times in LA when I was out there. But Vin Scully, it's not getting to hear him a ton, but knowing that it's his last season, I've listened to him more and more and gone back and listened to some old broadcasts just to hear his style. And then you listen to Hawk Harrelson and you go, how do people like Hawk Harrelson when they can hear a guy like Vin Scully, who is just so smooth, and he puts these ridiculous stories that he's talking about into his account of the game. He'll be like, so this player went out there and he was at a strip club and he had a girl shaking her tush on him, and that's a low for ball 3. So then he's throwing dollar bills into her. Oh, and they had ball in play. Line drive hit for player so-and-so. He's on first, looking to take second. He's back at first. And then he starts putting dollar bills in her. He's just seamlessly putting these ridiculous stories into his broadcast while he's talking about the game. He's not missing a beat, even though he's like 80-something years old. And you got Hawk Harrelson, who can't stop talking about stupid Ted Williams. We all love Ted Williams, but he's not involved in every stupid story. So sick of Hawk Harrelson. Sorry, it's my side rant. But the White Sox are actually fun to watch, especially when you don't have to hear Hawk Harrelson when you're listening to the game. It's a good team, and I really think that they got a chance to win this division. So one last thing we're going to talk about is the NFL draft and the Chicago Bears. I know every week, if you listen to the show, every week we break down one position from basically after the Super Bowl till right before the NFL draft starts, and we talk about the top players at those positions 1 week at a time. And I don't just go through highlights or anything like that. I don't listen to other people's evaluations. As I watch game film, I watch every single snap of an entire game, and I usually watch a couple games for every player, and I give my honest opinion about them. And sometimes it widely differs from Mel Kiper and Mike Mayock, etc. But sometimes I'm right. Sometimes they're wrong. A lot of times I feel like I've been pretty right. But I decided not to do outside linebackers because the Bears play a 3-4 now, and the 4-3 outside linebackers, they're not going to draft those. And any of the ones that I felt could play inside linebacker, I've already talked about. So I decided not to talk about them. So this week is one of our last shows before the NFL draft, I decided to go through and find national media that do their mock drafts and compile a list of them of what they think the Bears are going to do with the number 11 pick overall. So I broke them down by who picked what player. And I have them in alphabetical order, so it's because I have a spreadsheet that I put this in. Excel, brushing my hand on my chest like it's an apple. Sean Robinson, defensive tackle out of Alabama. Moon Mullins from CSN Chicago picked him. I don't know why. It's probably the same reason he writes terrible articles that have interesting titles but don't ever get to that point that he talked about in his title. He walks around training camp with a weird, goofy hat. Sean Robinson has no place in being a top 11 pick. Bad pick. Ugh. Two people pick Darren Lee, the linebacker, outside linebacker from Ohio State, and that's Jared Dubin from CBS Sports and Matt Miller from Bleacher Report. He's a really good player out of Ohio State, but he is not a middle. He's not an inside linebacker. He's a straight up 4-3 outside linebacker, and the Bears don't really have a place for that. I think it's kind of a wasted pick. He doesn't have a position here. Then we get to my dude, DeForest Buckner, defensive 3-4 defensive end out of Oregon, and he's picked to be the Bears pick by Lance Zierlein of NFL.com, Chad Reuter of NFL.com, Lester Wiltfong, our old friend from SB Nation, who was on the show last season, and Nate Davis from USA Today. Love that pick. Next is Jack Conklin, offensive tackle out of Michigan State. Chris Collinsworth picks him. Again, I'm okay with Jack Conklin. He's probably the number 3 rated offensive tackle in this draft, and I kind of agree with that. But he's definitely not Laramie Tunsil. That guy is hands above everybody else. But straight up, right now, he's better than Ronnie Stanley. But Ronnie Stanley is a much higher ceiling. Ronnie Stanley is much more athletic. He could really be a great NFL player. Jack Conklin is what Jack Conklin is, and he's a tough, hard-nosed, Big Ten style offensive lineman. He might be a little too unathletic to play left tackle, but he could be like an Andrew Whitworth and be a very good, solid technique guy that uses his strong base and his good leverage to become a good left tackle. I really like Jack Conklin. I think that's a fine pick. I'd be okay with him at number 11. Jaron Reed, defensive tackle out of Alabama. He's picked by Charles Davis of NFL.com, Rob Rang of CBS Sports, Pat Kerwin of SiriusXM, and Ike Taylor of NFL Media. Oh, I'm sorry. I take that back. He's only picked by Charles Davis and Rob Rang. Jaron Reed is another Sean Robinson. I don't see the appeal. Don't take him at number 11. Then you got Joey Bosa, outside linebacker from Ohio State. Pat Kerwin of SiriusXM and Ike Taylor of NFL Media pick him. Sorry, it was bad reading day. Joey Bosa again. I don't think he falls to number 11, but I'm not fully sold on him. I think he's got a high upside, but I think he could be a flop. He doesn't have superstar guaranteed stamp on him like a lot of other people. I see Laramie Tunsil as a guy that you could stamp and say, this guy is going to be very good. Joey Bosa just doesn't. I don't have that confidence with him. He's got the talent, but I just don't see enough of him at Ohio State. I didn't see enough production at Ohio State to warrant that. I would not pick him. Then you've got Leonard Floyd, outside linebacker from Georgia, picked by Daniel Jeremiah of NFL.com, Michael Shoddy from Forbes, and Mel Kiper of ESPN. Again, Leonard Floyd, very fast, very athletic. He's smaller than Alshon Jeffrey. Like, you would look at those two and be like, there's no way that guy is the outside linebacker. Too thin. He scares me a little bit. Is he going to be able to put on the mass in order to rush the passer consistently? Then you have Noah Spence, outside linebacker of Eastern Kentucky, picked by Michelle Bruton of Bleacher Sports. Terrible pick is to pick an addict at number 11 that got booted from the Big Ten and still didn't have the greatest of production in Eastern Kentucky. Nope. He might be fine in this league, but he didn't show enough pass rushing moves or elite pass rushing ability at Eastern Kentucky, let alone what he's going to do in the NFL. Sorry. Ronnie Stanley, offensive tackle out of Notre Dame, picked by Nick Klopsis out of Newsday. Again, this is a pick I'm okay with. Shaq Lawson, outside linebacker of Clemson. Todd McShay, ESPN, picks him to go to the Bears. Again, I'm okay with Shaq Lawson. He's a lot like Pernell McPhee, but that's not a bad thing necessarily. Vernon Hargraves, the cornerback out of Florida. Bucky Brooks of NFL.com and Will Brinson of CBS Sports pick him to be their number 11 pick overall. I'm not a huge fan of Vernon Hargraves. I think he's overrated. I wouldn't pick him at number 11. William Jackson III, cornerback out of Houston. Aaron Lemming of Bears Report picks him as their number 11 pick, first round pick. I like William Jackson III. He's not number 11. I think if you get him in the second round, I'm very happy. If you get him with the number 11 pick, not happy at all. He's way too early for him. So what I did is every week I do a mock draft, and this one I did a little differently. Usually I use firstpick.com, which is first-pick.com, and it simulates for me, so I don't have to go through and be like, well, I feel this team is going to pick this, and where I have a bias in what other teams are going to pick. And I don't have an expertise on other teams. I watch a lot of Chicago Bears. I scout the players for the Chicago Bears, and I feel like if I do anybody else, I'm not doing a service to them or being as accurate as possible. So I usually use them and do a 7-round mock. But this week I decided to do a little differently. I decided to go through the first 11 picks, and I hand mocked all them for every team in the first 11 picks. And then I used firstpick.com to mock the rest of the draft. So going through this is realistic. This is realistically what I see could happen. Number 1 overall pick goes the St. Louis Rams. And I think we all know about this trade where the Rams gave up way too much to the Tennessee Titans to get that number 1 pick. You don't move up for Laramie Tunsil. You don't move up for an edge rusher unless it's like a Julius Peppers. You move up there for a quarterback. So Rams are definitely going to take a quarterback. I thought long and hard, and I think they're going to take Carson Wentz. So number 1 overall pick, Carson Wentz. Cleveland, I just feel like they're going to take a quarterback again, Jared Goff. The Chargers, I think they take Jalen Ramsey. I just feel like they want to replace a long-time really good safety that they had. They lost in free agency. They're going to try to replace him again with a younger version. So I think they take Jalen Ramsey. I don't think Jerry Jones at number 4 can pass up the athleticism and talent of a Miles Jack. You've got your returning linebackers that are good when they're healthy, but how much longer can they be healthy? So even if Miles Jack isn't able to start the season, which I'm hearing mixed reports on his medicals, but if he can't play the beginning of this season, you're still set. I think this is a long-term pick. Miles Jack is so talented. I think Jerry Jones can't help but pick him. Then you just, at number 5, it's a no-brainer at this point, is you take Laramie Tunsil. Might be the best player in the draft. You got to pick him. Number 6 is, I think the Ravens take Joey Bosa. Their star-studded defense is not as star-studded as it once was. So they're going to take an edge rusher, and they're going to take Joey Bosa. San Francisco at number 7, I really had a tough time picking what they were going to do. It just, there's so many directions that they could go, and you never know with Chip Kelly what he's going to be thinking. And one part of me wants to say he's going to pick DeForest Buckner because he would be a great pick for what they need. And he's a former Oregon Duck. But I think you go with a left tackle. You pick Ronnie Stanley. That's what I think they do. The number 8 pick. Everybody's mocking him, and I feel like there's got to be some truth there. And the Philadelphia Eagles take Ezekiel Elliott. Number 9, Vernon Hargreaves. I'm hoping this happens. Is a lot of people are mocking him to the Tampa Bay Bucks. I don't see why not. They need a cornerback. They add theoretically what most quote unquote experts are saying is the best cornerback in the draft. Vernon Hargreaves goes to Tampa Bay. And then the New York Giants, they're another one. What do they do? And I feel like they take a hard-nosed offensive lineman to help bolster that line and protect Manning. And they take Jack Conklin. And this leaves my guy, my number 1 overall guy I would like for the Bears to get is at number 11, DeForest Buckner, defensive end for a 3-4 defensive end out of Oregon. I think if the Bears get him, that changes the game plan on this defense. Is you put Akeem Hicks on one side of Goldman, and you put DeForest Buckner on the other side, and then you add your edge rushers on the outside, and suddenly that defensive line goes from mediocre to formidable. And then with that, round 2 with the number 10 pick in the second round, I have the Bears taking Keanu Neal, safety out of Florida. I think this is a really good value pick. You need another safety. Can you go in through another season with Old Man River as your safety? I don't even know if he makes this team. So you have a safety of the future in the second round. The third round, the pick 9 in the third round, I have the Bears taking Carl Nassib, outside linebacker out of Penn State. Bringing in another edge rusher. I think it's good value there. The pick 8 in the fourth round, little bit of a reach for him, I think, but I really do like him. And at this point, I feel like the top guys at running back are by far and away gone. That second tier are starting to fly off the boards, and you got to grab him. Otherwise, you get a bottom of the barrel running back. Is C.J. Prosise, running back out of Notre Dame. I like him a lot, and I feel like he could really complement the backs that the Bears have right now, and he really fit well into this rotation. The 29th pick in the fourth round is I have the Bears taking Braylon Addison, wide receiver out of Oregon. Again, is he a star guy? No. Is he a barn burner? Not necessarily. He's got nice speed, but he's more quick than he is fast. I think he could be the answer at slot receiver. The Bears could use more depth at wide receiver, so I feel like this is a good fit. With the pick 11 in the fifth round, I have the Bears taking Bryce Williams, tight end out of East Carolina. They are very thin at tight end. You've only got one guy that's starting caliber. Bryce Williams, he's pretty much like a poor man's Greg Olsen. I guess that's probably the best way to describe him. Poor man Greg Olsen. But you know what? You could really use that in your lineup. Adds an actual potency to your offense, especially when he gets assimilated into the NFL style speed and gets some playing time. Sixth round pick, the number 10 pick in the sixth round, because the Bears have two sixth rounders. I have Blake Martinez, inside linebacker, Stanford. Anybody comes out of that Stanford program on defense, you know you're gonna have a solid guy who's gonna play hard. And then the second sixth round pick, the 31st overall, I have the Bears taking Darryl Worley, cornerback out of West Virginia. I like Darryl Worley, especially at this late in the stage of the game. I think he could be a contributor right off the bat, and be a dime corner or definitely a special teamer. And then finally, I reached on the last pick, but it was more of I felt obligated to take a quarterback. So I have in the 7th round, pick 9, Cody Kessler, quarterback out of Southern California, USC. I don't think he makes it in the NFL, but you take a flyer with 7th round pick on a quarterback, see what you get. So I think that's a really solid pick for the Bears. The draft I have, you got to figure it's a coup if you can get a starting caliber running back, rotational depth at outside linebacker, possibly another starting safety, starting defensive tackle, and depth at your tight end and cornerback positions. So I'm really happy with that. So we'll see more. We'll talk more next week. Next week will be the final dry run before we hit the NFL draft, and I really feel like we can start to see some clues next week, if not from the Bears, from some of the other teams. So that's all I really want to talk about. Again, if you guys have questions, anything you want to talk about, please feel free to hit us up. You can hit us up on any of the socials, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports, Twitter @Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com, YouTube.com/Swerski Sports. Subscribe, share with your friends, send us any questions, and thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, bear down.
What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on planes. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears! Oh, when the Bears go bearing down